On the bitterly cold morning of December 17, 1944, in the snow-dusted town of Hansfeld, Belgium, the Tiger tank's engine coughed violently, sputtered, and then fell silent. SS Obashto Banura. Joachim Peiper slammed his fist against the turret hatch, the metallic clang echoing across the pre-dawn Ardennes forest as his driver, Unschar Weber, frantically tried to restart the 700-horsepower Maybach engine, but the tank remained lifeless. The fuel gauge read empty, and the reserve tank offered nothing. Herr Oberonura Weber's tight, panic-stricken voice called up from his compartment. The reserve tank was dry. Peiper climbed down, his boots crunching against the frozen Belgian soil, and looked around him. Around him, the most powerful armored spearhead Germany had assembled for Operation Watch on the Rhine, 67 tanks, 149 half-tracks, and nearly 5,000 Waffen-SS soldiers sat immobilized, paralyzed by a scarcity that no amount of bravery could overcome. Through the morning mist, Peiper could see the abandoned American position ahead. Hansfeld, a critical forward supply depot for the U.S. 99th Infantry Division. The Americans had fled with such haste that fires still burned in oil drums, coffee remained hot in metal cups, and, most astonishingly, rows upon rows of olive-drab jerry cans were stacked like pyramids across the snow-dusted fields, filled with thousands of gallons of gasoline. Peiper approached slowly, almost reverently, as his adjutant, Hauptmann Hans Gruller, pried open a can and sniffed the sweet, potent smell of high-octane fuel. His men began the frantic work of refueling vehicles. The mathematics staggering: 50,000 gallons, enough to fuel the entire command group for the push to the Meuse River, enough to potentially change the course of the offensive, more fuel than most German divisions had received in 6 months. Yet, as Peiper stood among the bounty, watching his men pour American fuel into German tanks, a crushing realization settled over him like the morning fog. If the Americans could afford to abandon such quantities, leaving what Germany would have protected with entire divisions, then this war was already lost. Germany hadn't just miscalculated, it had fundamentally misunderstood the scale, efficiency, and depth of its enemy's resources. 6 months earlier, in June 1944, Albert Speer had presented Hitler with a report detailing Germany's synthetic fuel crisis, lifeblood of the Wehrmacht systematically destroyed by Allied bombing. The Leona Works, which had produced 175,000 tons of fuel in April, managed only 5,000 tons by September. Hydrogenation plants at Pitz, Bleymar, and Bruck were operating at less than 10% capacity, and the numbers spelled inevitable defeat. In 1944, the United States produced 1.8 billion barrels of crude oil, while Germany, including synthetic production and captured Romanian fields, produced less than 33 million barrels, under 2% of American output. While America flooded its armies with fuel, Germany attempted mechanized warfare on horse-drawn logistics. Peiper understood this truth intimately. At 29, he was one of the youngest regimental commanders in the Waffen-SS, a veteran of the Eastern Front, holder of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords, and a soldier who had learned the brutal lesson that in modern mechanized warfare, fuel was often more precious than ammunition. Peiper's group was designated the Schwerpunkt, the decisive point of the Ardennes offensive. On December 14th, at a final briefing in Tondorf, General Sepp Dietrich had been blunt. "You will only have enough fuel to reach the Meuse if you capture American supplies." Peiper calculated the arithmetic. His fuel allocation was 31,000 gallons, sufficient for only 50 miles of combat, while the distance to the Meuse was 65. The plan's failure was built into its design. On December 16th, as the German artillery barrage opened Operation Watch on the Rhine, using more ammunition in 2 hours than the Wehrmacht had allocated for entire operations earlier in the war, Peiper's column began moving on narrow Ardennes roads. facing unexpected resistance from a small American reconnaissance platoon of 18 men who delayed the German advance for nearly 10 hours, burning fuel at a staggering rate. By the time Piper reached Hansfeld at dawn on December 17th, his column had consumed 40% of their fuel after covering just 20 miles, highlighting the deadly fragility of the operation. The Americans, in contrast, operated on a scale beyond comprehension. Pipelines pumping hundreds of thousands of gallons daily, the Red Bull Express delivering 2,500 tons of supplies each day, trucks consuming 40 gallons daily, yet maintaining relentless supply, and fuel stockpiles that could be destroyed at will rather than risk capture. Over the next days, as Piper pushed deeper into Belgium, capturing depots at Billingen and Leidenville, discovering maps of additional fuel reserves, he saw the scale of the Americans' logistical advantage. Depots contained millions of gallons, and when American engineers, warned of his approach, burned fuel at Stavelot, 289,000 gallons on 15 acres, it became clear that Germany's desperate hopes rested on quantities dwarfed by a single day's American operations. Tiger tanks burned 2.5 gallons per mile, Panthers 1.5, and in Ardennes terrain consumption increased by 40%, while Americans moved vehicles and troops efficiently, consuming far less per mile. By December 19th, Piper's forces were immobilized by fuel shortages, tanks abandoned with engines dry, ambulances unable to transport wounded, hospitals without generators, and soldiers demoralized as their arithmetic of scarcity collided with the enemy's oceans of abundance. Piper, reflecting decades later, described the horror of realizing that the 50,000 gallons captured at Hansfeld, seemingly miraculous, were negligible to an enemy who could afford to destroy millions. German soldiers witnessed the Americans burning supplies, discarding rations, and running engines for warmth without concern, shattering the myth of German superiority and undermining morale more effectively than any battle. By December 24th, Piper's men abandoned 39 tanks, 70 half-tracks, and 107 other vehicles, retreating on foot with only a fraction of the original force. And yet the Americans continued delivering fuel and supplies with astonishing consistency, conducting 2,000 sorties on clear weather days, their planes consuming more fuel in hours than Germany's entire Ardennes allocation. The Ardennes campaign illustrated the decisive nature of industrial warfare. Wars were no longer won by valor or tactical genius alone, but by production capacity, logistical efficiency, and the ability to sustain forces through a mechanized battlefield. Piper's Tiger tank, now preserved in a museum with its fuel gauge frozen at empty, stands as a silent testament to the moment when tactical skill collided with industrial reality and lost. A monument to the lesson that in modern war, armies fueled by abundance will inevitably defeat those constrained by scarcity, no matter the bravery or training of the soldiers. The numbers tell the story. Germany allocated 5 million gallons for the offensive. Americans destroyed 8 million, consumed 7.5 million daily, and operated with reserves exceeding anything Germany could conceive. Piper's discovery at Hansfeld was not merely about fuel, it was the revelation that industrial capacity had decided the war long before bullets flew. That logistical supremacy, not courage, was the ultimate arbiter of victory, and that Germany had been fighting an impossible war, measuring defeat in liters, while their enemy measured in oceans.